On a quiet evening in Maplewood, a retired schoolteacher walks into a biker bar and turns the tables on a night of harassment. This is the story of Martha, the unassuming heroine who proves that age and appearance mean nothing when it comes to strength and courage. In the heart of Maplewood, a small town where everyone knew everyone, there was a bar called the Rusty Nugget. It was a place where the local bikers and roughnecks hung out, a place where the scent of aged wood and stale beer filled the air. The neon sign outside flickered, casting an eerie glow on the dusty streets. Inside, the jukebox blared an old country tune, and the patrons nursed their drinks, lost in their own worlds. On this particular evening, the atmosphere was heavy with the usual mix of laughter and tension. The regulars were in their usual spots, and the air was thick with cigarette smoke and the faint hum of conversation. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and in walked Martha, a woman in her late 60s with a gentle smile and twinkling eyes. She was dressed in a simple blouse and jeans, her silver hair neatly pulled back into a bun. Her arrival was met with a chorus of surprised whispers and curious glances. Martha, a retired schoolteacher, was known for her kindness and wisdom, but she was an unlikely visitor to the Rusty Nugget. The bartender, a burly man with a thick beard, looked up from polishing the counter and raised an eyebrow. "What brings you here, Martha?" he asked, his voice a deep rumble. Martha smiled, her eyes sparkling with a mix of mischief and determination. "I'm looking for someone," she said, her voice steady and calm. Her presence was both comforting and intriguing, a stark contrast to the rough-and-tumble atmosphere of the bar. She walked over to the counter, her heels clicking softly on the worn wooden floor. The patrons watched her, their eyes narrowing as they tried to figure out what she was doing there. A few of them exchanged glances, their curiosity piqued. The bartender slid a menu towards her, his expression unreadable. "You sure you're in the right place?" he asked, his voice laced with a hint of concern. Martha nodded, her smile never wavering. "Oh, I'm exactly where I need to be," she replied, her voice filled with a quiet strength. The room fell silent for a moment, the jukebox seeming to fade into the background. The patrons exchanged uneasy glances, their curiosity turning into a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Martha, unfazed by the stares and whispers, took a seat at the counter and waited patiently. She knew that her presence was unexpected, but she was ready for whatever came her way. Little did she know, this night would be one she would never forget. A night that would prove to the world that age and appearance mean nothing when it comes to strength and courage. And it wasn't long before their curiosity and suspicion gave way to taunts and laughter. A group of bikers, led by a burly man named Jake, started to notice Martha sitting quietly at the counter. One of them, a man with a shaved head and a thick beard, leaned against the bar. His eyes narrowed in suspicion. "What are you doing here, old lady?" he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. The room erupted in laughter, the tension in the air turning into a mix of amusement and mockery. Martha didn't flinch. She kept her eyes fixed on the menu, her expression calm and composed. "I'm waiting for someone," she replied, her voice steady and unruffled. The laughter grew louder, the bikers feeding off each other's energy. Another man, his arms covered in tattoos, stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with malice. "You think you belong here?" he taunted, his voice loud and mocking. "You're in the wrong place, Granny." The room howled with laughter, the patrons joining in, their voices rising in a chorus of derision. Martha didn't react. She simply adjusted the strap of her purse, her movements slow and deliberate. She knew that her presence was a challenge to their macho facade, and she was ready to face whatever came her way. The bartender, who had been watching the scene unfold, stepped in. "Come on, guys," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "Leave her alone." The bikers turned to him, their eyes flashing with anger. "Who are you to tell us what to do?" Jake growled, his fist clenching. The bartender held his ground, his voice steady. "This is my bar, and I won't have anyone harassing my customers." The room fell silent for a moment, the tension thick and palpable. The bikers exchanged glances, their anger turning into a mix of frustration and confusion. Martha, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, took a deep breath and stood up. She turned to face the room, her eyes scanning the crowd. She saw the curiosity, the suspicion, and the mockery, but she also saw a glimmer of respect, a silent acknowledgement of her strength and courage. She knew that she had their attention, and she was ready to use it to her advantage. But little did they know, their harassment was about to take a dramatic turn, one that would leave them speechless and in awe of the unassuming woman who had walked into their world. The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with anticipation. Martha stood tall, her eyes scanning the crowd of bikers and tough guys who had been mocking her just moments before. She took a deep breath, her voice steady and calm as she addressed the room. "I understand that my presence here is unexpected," she began, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "But I assure you I have a good reason for being here." The room fell even quieter, the patrons leaning in, their curiosity piqued. Jake, the burly biker who had been the most vocal in his harassment, stepped forward, his arms crossed over his chest. "Yeah, and what's that?" he sneered, his voice dripping with skepticism. Martha's gaze met his, her eyes unblinking. "I'm here to deliver a message," she said. her voice firm. A message that someone very important to me asked me to pass along. The room erupted in a mix of laughter and jeers, the tension breaking for a moment. You're here to deliver a message, one of the bikers scoffed, his voice laced with ridicule. This ought to be good. Martha ignored the mockery, her focus unwavering. Yes, she replied, her voice steady. And the message is for all of you. The room fell silent again, the patrons exchanging glances, their curiosity turning into a mix of confusion and intrigue. Martha took a moment, her eyes sweeping over the crowd, and then, with a swift and unexpected movement, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. She held it up, her voice filled with a quiet strength. This message is from someone who knows you all very well, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Someone who has been watching you, studying you, and who has a few things to say. The room was silent, the patrons holding their breath, waiting for the twist, and then, with a dramatic flourish, Martha unfolded the paper and began to read. But as she spoke the first words, the room gasped in disbelief. The message was from the police chief, a man known for his tough stance on crime and his zero-tolerance policy for harassment. And it was a warning, a stark and unmistakable warning that left the patrons of the Rusty Nugget speechless and in awe of the unassuming woman who had walked into their world. The room was frozen in shock. No one spoke or moved as Martha read aloud the message from the police chief. His words were clear and commanding, leaving no room for misinterpretation. I have received reports of harassment and intimidation at the Rusty Nugget. Let it be known that any further incidents will not be tolerated. From now on, I expect this establishment to uphold the law and treat all patrons with respect. Failure to comply will result in severe consequences. The room was silent, the air thick with disbelief and fear. The bikers and roughnecks who had been so quick to mock and harass Martha now looked at her with a mix of awe and trepidation. Jake, his face pale, stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock. How did you get that? He stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Martha folded the paper neatly and placed it back in her purse. She looked around the room, her eyes meeting the gaze of each patron. The police chief is a close friend of mine, she said, her voice steady and calm. He entrusted me with this message because he knew I could deliver it. The bartender, who had been watching the scene unfold, let out a low whistle, his eyes filled with respect. I knew there was more to you than meets the eye. Martha, he said, his voice laced with admiration. Martha smiled, her eyes twinkling with a mix of mischief and determination. She turned to face the room, her voice filled with a quiet strength. I may be retired, she said, but I still have a few tricks up my sleeve. The room erupted in a mix of laughter and applause, the tension breaking as the patrons realized the gravity of the situation. You see, Martha continued, her voice rising above the noise, age and appearance mean nothing when it comes to strength and courage. I may look like an ordinary grandmother, but I have a past that has taught me to stand up for what is right, no matter the cost. The room fell silent again, the patrons hanging on her every word. Martha took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the crowd. And tonight, she said, her voice filled with conviction, I stand before you not just as a messenger, but as a symbol of resilience and empowerment. You underestimated me because of who I am and how I look. But I am here to tell you that you were wrong. Never underestimate the power of an ordinary person, for they might just surprise you. With that, Martha turned and walked out of the bar, her head held high and her steps steady. The patrons watched her go, their eyes filled with a newfound respect and admiration. They had underestimated her, and now they knew the true meaning of strength and courage. As Martha walked out of the Rusty Nugget, the atmosphere inside shifted dramatically. The patrons, who had once mocked and harassed her, now looked at each other with a mixture of embarrassment and respect. The jukebox, which had been blaring country tunes, seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the hum of whispered conversations. Jake, the burly biker who had been the most vocal in his harassment, stood frozen in place, his eyes fixed on the door through which Martha had exited. The weight of his actions settled heavily on his shoulders. The bartender, still polishing the counter, looked up with a mixture of awe and admiration. You really put them in their place, Martha, he said softly, his voice filled with respect. Martha turned back, her eyes meeting his. She smiled gently, her voice calm and composed. Sometimes, all it takes is a reminder of what's right, she replied. The other patrons began to murmur, their voices a mix of regret and newfound understanding. A few of them stood up, their faces flushed with a combination of embarrassment and realization. One by one, they approached the bartender, their voices low but sincere. We were wrong, they admitted, their heads bowed. We underestimated you, Martha. That was a mistake. One of the older bikers, his arms covered in tattoos, looked at Martha with a mix of respect and guilt. I've been in this bar for years, he said, his voice gruff with emotion. I've never seen anyone stand up to us like you did. You showed us tonight what true courage looks like. Martha's heart swelled with pride, but she kept her composure. She nodded, her eyes soft but firm. It's never too late to change, she said. All it takes is the willingness to see things from a different perspective. The room fell silent for a moment. the weight of Martha's words settling over the patrons. Slowly, the atmosphere began to shift. The tension that had once filled the air gave way to a sense of unity and respect. The bikers and roughnecks, who had once been divided by their macho attitudes, now stood together, united in their newfound admiration for Martha. As Martha walked away from the Rusty Nugget, the neon sign flickering above her, she knew that she had made a difference. She had shown them that age and appearance mean nothing when it comes to strength and courage. And as she disappeared into the night, the patrons of the Rusty Nugget were left with a lasting lesson, one that would change the way they saw the world and themselves. The next day, the bar was different. The roughnecks and bikers treated everyone with a newfound respect, their actions guided by the memory of Martha's courage. And in the small town of Maplewood, Martha became more than just a retired schoolteacher. She became a symbol of resilience and empowerment, a reminder that true strength comes from within. And as the days turned into weeks, the story of Martha's night at the Rusty Nugget became a legend, a tale of courage and wisdom that would be passed down from one generation to the next.